So everybody these days has Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. Welcome everybody to this webinar by the Center for International Higher Education. We are very grateful in these difficult circumstances that the world is, that we are able to technology to communicate with each other and having this kind of important events taking place. And it's good to see many people joining us. We will have this presentation by Jean-Baptiste Diatta, which is, I would say, Father Jean-Baptiste Diatta, who is our doctoral candidate in the Center for International Higher Education. And he will talk about Catholic higher education in Central Africa. Just a little bit of a background why this project is happening. Of course, the Center for International Higher Education is part of Boston College, which is the Catholic Jesuit institution of higher education. And we as Center also have a strong interest to understand what is happening with Catholic higher education in the world, which is part of our mission to understand and to analyze. And we have done several projects in the past, also an inventory of Catholic higher education. We've done a study on internationalization of higher education of Catholic universities, what is in particular their mission to internationalize over the past years. And when we were talking with Jean-Baptiste about his interest, and he has a strong interest in particular in quality assurance of higher education in the region, we said, well, it might be good to have a better understanding of what happens in the context of Catholic higher education in particular French-speaking Central Africa. And so he has done this study over the summer of last year, and has drafted a report which is now in its final version. And we thought it would be good to have this webinar where he can present his research and his findings, also as a basis for discussion. So in that sense, we look very much forward to this presentation, and we will have time after the presentation for question and answers by Jean-Baptiste, and we'll see how we can do that within the time frame that we have been establishing. But for the moment, I would suggest that Jean-Baptiste shares the screen, and then we'll present his presentation, and we follow up on that. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jean-Baptiste, for taking the floor with this presentation.
I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, it's there. Thank you.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jean-Baptiste Diatta. So I'm a doctoral student in the higher education program and research associate at the Center for International Higher Education. So today we are going to have this conversation on Catholic higher education institution in Francophone West Africa, challenges and opportunities. So as Hans said, this is the result of my research I conducted last summer. Without further notice, I'm going to start. This is the outlines of my presentation. We will start first by defining the scope of the study, the literature review, and then we will talk about the research purpose and questions, the research design. I will highlight the results, I will give some highlights, and then key takeaways, and follow the research limitation and future direction. And we will have this question answer session. Of course, I did put this slide of picture to remind us what we are missing today because of the coronavirus, we used to start always our conversation with sharing a pizza. So you can have it virtually. So the research is interested in institution located in West Africa, precisely francophone West Africa. This region is constituted by 8 countries. Each of them hosts at least 2 to 4 institutions, except Niger. Niger does not have a Catholic higher institution. So all of those countries have French as a language of instruction. And all of them have been former colonies of France, except Togo, which has been once a German colony and then handed over after World War I to France. All of them share the same currency in terms of money. And this region is constituted by a population of more than 100 million, which let's say 60% of this population less than 25 years old. So a young population in its majority. Definition of the region. Now we move to the definition of the institution to be studied. We are interested in Catholic higher education institutions regulated by the general norms of ex corde and canon law, specifically the canon 807 and 814. Those are the major rules that regulate Catholic higher education institutions. We are also interested, those institutions has to be universities, institute, or what we call école supérieure, that grant post-secondary training, whether professional or research oriented, and which end with a formal recognized state degree. So this is the criterion for exclusion or inclusion. And it is important because if you don't set this criterion, this will not help you make some, for instance, comparison with peer lay institutions. The literature review. One thing that is striking with regard to Catholic higher education, there is almost nothing, almost no research about this region, Catholic higher education in this region specifically. So when you hit now a research on, let's say, Catholic higher education in general, you will come across with 2 articles, one by a French named Lejeune, with the title, The Challenge of Catholic Universities in Africa, the Role of Acquiring International Higher Education. So this is, in fact, this is a brief description of the landscape in which Catholic higher education are operating in the context of Africa in general. And it is also mainly a presentation of this association, which is the Association of Catholic Universities and Higher Institutions in Africa and Madagascar. And in this article, after presenting this landscape, he posited that academic excellence and service to the poor are the major challenges facing Catholic higher education institution in Africa. Another article was written by Red, and it was entitled Catholic Universities in Africa. In this article, she started by giving a broad presentation of the history of higher education in Africa in general. And then in the next move, she will identify 5 challenges based on a UNESCO document. And those 5 challenges are knowledge production, competencies that integrate hard science and humanities, HIV that hamper the creation of a solid academic body, the lack of qualified academic staff, and finances. Those are the challenges they mentioned. Of course, as you can notice, those are old articles and they are generalist, so they are not focused on the region, which somehow give the basis for our research. So we have 2 interrelated purposes for this research. The first was to offer a general depiction of the current state of Catholic higher education in this particular region. and also provide a starting point for future research that will focus on Catholic higher education institutions in this region. Here are the research questions. I am not going to go through all of them. We will come back to it because when I will be giving the result, you will have a sense of what was the question. In terms of research design, I use what we call an explanatory sequential mixed method, which bring together a quantitative and a qualitative design. So I started by a quantitative design, which was made of a non-line survey submitted through April to May, and then followed a qualitative, which was mainly interviews made in 5 counties of the region between June and August. And then the final step was the integration of the quant and qualitative data. So here are some highlights of the research. First, we have in this region 21 Catholic higher education institutions. 8 of them were created by religious entities, 8 others by the Episcopal Conference, 4 by bishops, and 1 by the Holy See, Vatican. It is also interesting to see how they emerge, those institutions. There is a pattern of Vicenia that emerged. For instance, in the first Vicenium, between the 60s and 1980, you have only 1 institution. And the second will and the 5 others will appear in between 1980 and 1999. And you have the 15 other institutions that will appear in the turn of the 21st century. In terms of demographic makeup, those institutions are really male-dominated for the student bodies, staff, faculty, and administrative alike. They are mainly male-dominated. We have also a good presence of international students in the staff and within the student body and faculty body. I would just want to point out to this particular thing is the reliance of those institutions in part-time. 94% of the faculty body was made of part-time faculty. Another interesting thing is to realize that more than half, let's say 56% of the faculty body has a doctoral or PhD degree, and followed by those who hold a master degree, 40%, and just 3% hold a bachelor degree, what we call license. And I have also to say that those are mainly professional who come from the professional world to give some courses to mainly bachelor program oriented to professional training. This research was also interested in the presence of religious on campus. And by religious, we mean priests, nuns, brothers. So 5% of the faculty was constituted by those religious, and 15%, and they constitute also 15% of the administration staff. Themselves, we can see that 64% of religious are in the classrooms, 36% are in the administration, and 9% cumulate those 2 functions. In terms of importance of their presence in the campus, in the 3 areas of the campus, their presence were deemed important in the classroom, very important in the administration, and indispensable, indispensable in the administration and indispensable too in the spiritual activities. The research was also interested in the networking and partnership with peer Catholic higher education. In terms of networking with peer Catholic higher education or associations that are Catholic based, we can see that those institutions are extroverted, meaning they tend to be in partnership or networking with institutions located at the global level, meaning outside of the continent, mainly. This is true for the networking and for the partnership, and then follow the regional region for the partnership, and same, let's say, same for the networking. So we can see the an extroversion pattern here. Now, when it comes to networking and partnership with non-Catholic higher education, meaning associations that are not Catholic based, we see the inverse, the opposite. They are more introverted. For instance, in terms of networking, they are more committed in networking with institutions located within the country, and followed by, for instance, in terms of networking, followed by the continental institution located at the continental level. In terms of the partnership, they are more committed with institutions, like I said, within the country, followed by the global level. So here we have the inverse, more introverted. We were interested by in their partnership practices. By internship partnership practices, we mean the term of the type of partnership they undertake. What do they do when they are in partnership? So institution was provided with a list of six model of partnerships to choose from, to define in which type of the partnership they are. Those were joint degree, faculty exchange, student exchange, cultural, financial, and research collaboration. You can see that in terms of partnership practices with peer Catholic institutions, research collaboration take the lead, followed by student exchange. In terms of partnership with practices with non-Catholic higher education, research collaboration take the lead, followed by faculty exchange and student exchange. So those are the main domain in which they collaborate. Another question asked to the participant was, what are their main challenges? So they were provided with a list of 12 challenges taken from the literature, and they were asked to choose 5 challenges and to rank them in terms of importance. And as you can see, the first challenge they named was financial resources. The second being sufficient number of qualified teachers. The third, institutional reputation. The fourth, competition in the higher education sector. And the fifth, the new knowledge to solve problem of societies. So those are the major challenges that they have identified. They were also given the possibility to add their own challenges that might not be identified by the list. So these are the challenges that they named: student employability, student civic formation, infrastructure, leadership and management, diversity, I like this quote, how to be a Catholic university in a rainbow society. So after that, we were also interested in the initiatives and solutions they devised to face those challenges. So they was given the opportunity to name some solution, and we compiled those lists and then try to organize them in categories. And these are the categories that come out. Program innovations and expansion, meaning trying to expand what they have as program, or innovate new program according to the demand, local demands. Trying to find alternative sources of funding by, for instance, doing consultancy or apply research. By implementing quality assurance measures, focusing their student formation and employability, doing marketing and communication, fostering the Catholic identity of the institution, partnership and networking, good leadership and managerial practices, infrastructure and land acquisition. So those are the solutions that they are actually implementing to face the challenges. We also asked them to identify some threat to their mission. So they were also given a possibility to make their own list. So after they do those lists, we compile them again, use the same method, subsume them under categories. After subsuming them under categories, we realize that they can be put in two major classes based on their source or the place where they originate. For instance, we have some set that come from the external environment and some threat that come from the internal environment. In general, threat that come from internal environment, they are called weaknesses. So in terms of threat, we have state regulation and policies, accessibility, the effective road for some, job market, socioeconomic climate, students market. In terms of weaknesses, meaning internal environment threat, we have leadership and management issues, human resource quality and quantity, institutional longevity, the lack of experience, lack of sufficient financial resources, and infrastructure. We also asked them what are the assets and the strengths on which they can count to be able to accomplish their mission. Here are the lists they gave. We did also the same methodology. Qualified and committed human resources, quality of the student body, substance of their training, meaning the content of their programs, strategically well located. Most of those institutions are in fact well located in the cities where they are. Institutional reputation, regularity of the academic year, academic organization. They have some scientific and pedagogical council. Most of them implemented the LMD reform. The learning conditions, which are very far better than in some states system, public social trust, implementation of new leadership and managerial tools. I think you notice, I just want to point out the fact that you will notice that human resources are named as a challenge or an issue, and they are also identified as an asset. This can be contradictory, but we will see why it is so. It is the same for the institutional reputation. It is a challenge, but it is also counted as an asset. We will come back to it. In terms of Catholic higher education opportunities, they identify the social, political, and economic atmosphere as being an opportunity. In fact, those countries, most of them have a relative economic growth and political stability. You have also structural and academic reforms that they are implementing as being opportunities for them. Infrastructures and equipment acquirement, networking and partnership, demographic, a young population, as we mentioned it previously, some state policies and agreement as being also opportunities. This also was mentioned as a problem. Now we move to some key takeaways. The first takeaway is that, I guess you notice it, Catholic higher education institutions are not just a sea of challenges. They have valuable opportunities and assets they can count on to move forward. For instance, their reputation makes them attractive to qualified academic staff who are not really happy with the state system. They can just come there and teach peacefully, have a nice experience of teaching. And they are also attractive to committed students and also to government who are somehow forced to treat them as valuable partners. I will go straight to the three last points, which seem to me very important. It is that their networks and associations are real assets consistent with their needs. So there is a match between the networks and association and their need. They are linguistic based, of course, which can be a limitation because most of them are in networking that are French speaking countries. But if you look at them, you can see that they are need oriented. So this is a good thing. A second positive aspect is that most of the threat can be converted into opportunities. And this is very important for a strategic standpoint. When your threat can be converted into opportunity, those are really good threats that you want to have. Weaknesses are either workable in long or short terms, or they can be addressed by maximizing their strengths. So which means they have weaknesses, but they have within themselves some solution to those weaknesses. To say that they are not really hopeless. Another takeaway is that Catholic higher education prioritized challenges are not reducible to the general description of them in the literature devoted to private higher education sector in Africa in general. For instance, Reid mentioned HIV as being one of the major challenges. This was not chosen by any institutions. Of course, we have moved from 2009 to today. Second, I just mentioned it, the absence of qualified faculty is not an absence de facto, but de jure, meaning this is not an absence that they don't have it. No, there are good faculty over there. It just they don't belong to those institutions. They belong to state institutions. So we can say, well, they don't have, they can't, it is right to them to say that we don't have good faculty. But in the other hand, those good faculty are there working for them. So the lack is not really a lack in fact, but a lack in principle. Another point is that the reputation enhancement also is experiences as a moral imperative to maintain it, not as a lack. They have this reputation, but they feel morally constrained to maintain this reputation. Another point good to mention is the leadership, is that leadership and governance are becoming serious challenges as institutions grow and become more complex. And an example that I heard in most of the institutions was there are some intrusion of ecclesiastic authorities in academic affairs. Student formation and employability is also a serious concern, partly aggravated by terrorist organizations operating in the region. Another takeaway is that although generally overlooked, fostering a Catholic higher education, fostering a Catholic identity and ethos is a real challenge for most of those institutions. In fact, most of those institutions operate in a context where Catholics are minority. So the population of those institutions mirror the same reality. So you have less Catholic faculty, less student faculty. It became really hard to implement a Catholic ethos. They are operating also in a diverse and secular society, even if we don't sometimes say it. Those are really diverse societies. And this quotation again expresses it well, how to be a Catholic university in a rainbow society. The competition with pure lay institutions somehow pressure Catholic higher education to differentiate themselves by reaffirming their identity. So there is an environmental pressure here that is somehow salvific in the sense that they are called to reaffirm their identity. Most of Catholic higher education seek accreditation for their programs at CAMES, which is the Council for Higher Education in Africa and Madagascar. So by doing this, we have a professionalization and other related requirements that push toward institutional or cultural isomorphism, which in turn happily created the need to reaffirm their identity. So there is also a need created by this isomorphism to say, wait a minute, let's step back and let's ask ourselves, who are we? Do we have to go to follow every single thing that they tell us? Catholic higher education differences in founding, governance, and control impact their future, and I think a typology is justifiable. So when you see those institutions and you consider their governance, their control, you can see a pattern that can give birth to a typology. I try to use Michael James' typology, the typology he initiated and which worked for the American context. It works for the African context for some of its categories, but not of them. For instance, when you take the diocesan category, which is, let's say, an institution funded by a diocesan bishop, we have the existence of Catholic higher education funded by episcopal conferences, either national or regional. And then we have others created by bishop, but they are affiliated to the system of UCAO, which is the West African Catholic University. So when you look at their way of being, their regulation, their governance, it is hard to put them under the category diocesan, because an institution that is ruled by just one bishop obviously can be different from one that is under a regional conference. The second category was independent. This category do not exist in the African context, even if we have some institution created by Catholic, and those institutions are using name of Catholic saint, but they do not have a formal recognition, a Catholic formal recognition. So we can't count them as being really a Catholic institution. Religious sponsored could work, but we have to drop the expression sponsored, because as Michael James himself said in his article, sponsorship is not a canonical concept. And on the other hand, it is not really known in the French West African context. It is more an American reality. The fourth category is the one that really works perfectly. This is the category of institution created by Vatican, pontifical type. So given this reality, I suggest the following typology. Diocese, this is just another category from Michael. Episcopal conference, affiliated, meaning created by a bishop, but somehow is in affiliation relationship with ICAO. Religious, almost the same category than Michael. Pontifical, which is the same. And I added allied with some reticence, because allied are not really Catholic institutions. Like I said, they don't have this formal recognition. So this typology is important because it underscores some particularities important for understanding these institutions and their organizational behavior. For instance, when you compare those four types, you will see that they don't have the same preference model of partnership with pure Catholic institution. So if you take a look at this graph, you will notice that they don't have the same preference, where, for instance, for the financial model, religious type dominate. To understand why it dominates, you have also to set back and take a look at who is governing and who is funding, who the founder of this institution, and realize that those institutions can have this possibility to be in this type of relationship with institution that was funded by the same order, which can be difficult for others. If you take also the network, their networking preferences, you will see also the same, that they don't have the same preferences, and these preferences have to do also with who found them and how they are governed. Same for the challenges. None of them have the same number one top priority. Of course, they have some similarities, but this is also an indication that the typology has its raison d'etre. So, as any other work of human being, this research has some limitation, one of them being the timing. This was conducted during the vacation and most of institution was closed, and so it was hard to have people to respond. The second limitation has to do with the research design, the online survey method. It did not work. So most of them was filled when I arrived there. And the idea was to have them filled before I get there to be able to somehow organize the interviews. A second limitation is the vagueness of the research. As you can see, it is not just one area or one question that was researched. Since it was the first, I tended to ask different questions which make the research very vague, and this is somehow a limitation because you don't have the chance to deepen some insights. As future directions for future research, I think it will be good that future researchers address the following questions. How are assets and strengths used as part of Catholic higher education strategic plans? Because of course they said that they use it, but it will be good to see how it informed their strategic plans. Another area is governance and managerial practices in the 4 types of institution. It will be interesting to see how those 4 types differ in terms of governance and managerial practices, because I could feel it, but like I said, I was so broad, I could not deepen any element of it. And third area to address is partnership and networking as a way to internationalize, to see if there is a link with their identity and mission. So those were the 3 directions I think people could take on in future research. Thank you for your attention, and now we can have this session of question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baptiste, for this presentation of your research. I'm trying now to organize the questions and answers for everybody. So if you raise your hand, then I will see who wants to have a question. If one of those who are non-video participants, they might try to put a question into the chat box so that we can have a look at it as well. Can I ask for questions from the audience or comments? It's also possible. Yes, Norbert. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Jean-Baptiste, the first thing, thank you so much. This is wonderful to see, and thank you for all the good work you have put into this. It's really brilliant. One thing that came to mind for me as I was listening to you in relation to the identity of these institutions, you mentioned that a number of them exist in contexts where Catholics are generally the minority, and that is reflected in the faculty and staff you have in the institutions. And you highlighted that as a challenge when it comes to actually implementing a Catholic ethos. And you rightly mentioned that for many of these institutions, challenges are equally opportunities or assets, that there are possibilities for transforming these challenges into assets. What mechanisms do you see these institutions put in place to make sure that this non-Catholic faculty embrace the ethos that the institution wants to promote in the way it goes about fulfilling its mission?
Thanks. Should I answer now or we?
Yeah, maybe do that. Yeah, and then
Okay.
we go to the next one.
Thank you, Norba, for your questions. I have to say that, like I said, I was too generalist, so I did not have the chance to, how do you call it, to ask a specific questions regarding what they are doing. And this is why at the end I said, this is some areas that people should be looking at. But I know that from my experience that there are some institutions that have what they call journée pédagogique, a pedagogic day, in which they try to give to the faculty some insight regarding, let's say, the spirituality or the mission of the institutions. So this exists, at least I know 3 institutions that mention it. So this is what I can say for this this question. They have this, what they call those journées pédagogiques with the faculty members in to try, let's say, to give them some insight regarding their mission and their, how do you call it, the spirituality of the founding order.
I see. Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
that's fine. Yeah.
Augustine first. Yeah, right.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Baptiste Diatta, for your presentation. Well done for me, because it wasn't easy also because of what you all mentioned, vague, and how many countries you had to cross. That wasn't easy, but you made it. I want to follow up the question Norbert just asked. I always wonder if at the very beginning when the Catholic or the bishop or the bishop conferences, when they create this institution, do they have, I wonder if they have a plan to really implement the so-called Catholic social teaching ethos. I think this is a real lack, because maybe, I don't know if you came across to this kind of thing, because the problem is not to have a journée pédagogique for the faculty, no. But how can we really implement this kind of courses? Maybe you came across or the program and you see this kind of teaching, social teaching, Catholic social ethos. I think it's important. Why not a Catholic university? And we don't have, for example, a section for, I would say, theology. If we cannot say theology, at least the notion of ethics should be implemented, and we have to teach this kind of thing too, even if it's not purely Catholic, but how are we forming the man? And this is one of the challenges in our countries. Maybe we might think of kind of institutional reform. Yeah, in the Catholic institutions, we really need that reform. I don't know how can you make sense of all these things, because maybe you have opportunity to question some bishops on that matter. For example, if you had that opportunity, maybe you can share what you felt, your feeling, and I really wonder why this thing is missing in these kind of institutions.
Okay, I think your point is good, but I just want to say that it is not really a situation where it is really a nihil. No, there are some stuff that are implemented that could support the Catholic ethos. For instance, if you take at least the main campuses of Catholic University, West Africa Catholic University, they have a theology department. The question is, what is the impact of those departments in the ethos of the institution? This question is fair, you can ask that. But just to say that there are those department of theology in those schools, and some of them also give them some courses in moral, ethics, and social teaching. So there are some schools that implement that. And you have also some institutions that have started as institutions made to train catechists. So I don't think that, I'm not saying that it is the case, since they move now to a full institution, they take another turn. You can still ask the question, what is the impact of this origin of their history in the Catholic ethos? Like I said, I did not have the chance to deepen this question, but at least I know that most of them experience it as a challenge. Again, the challenge does not necessarily mean that there is nothing.
Thank you. Eric, and then Yannick, and then Michael.
So thanks for the presentation. I just had a couple of questions about the methodology. So who are the respondents? I don't think I heard that. Like, how many surveys were, who responded to the surveys from the quantitative side, and how many interviews were you doing on the qualitative side? And what does that represent from the population? And then I had a question also about your analysis, which focused on the typology of foundation and governance. And I was wondering why maybe it was not focused on this question of institutional type, right? Because I think even within Catholic higher education institutions, there's a little bit of variety there. The universities, the superior schools, or the faculties that are very specific to a subject area. And would your analysis and results look different if you controlled in that way?
Okay, the respondent in majority was directors of those institutions, and sometimes the delegate, for instance, what you will call here the provost of the school. So those were the direct, let's say, respondent. And let's say 20 institutions, there are 21 institutions, 20 of them responded. Just one in Mali, from Mali, did not respond. And there is a concern on if this institution is still operating or if they discontinued at the time I was doing my interview. So this is a detail that I cannot clarify, confirm or infirm. For the interview, it happened, I did it for 5 institutions, and the 5 institutions, most of them were also the director of the, how do you call it, of those institutions, except one institution in which I had the chance to interview the director himself and the provost. So it is mainly just the directors, those are the respondents. Now, with regard to the question related to the typology, I'm sorry, for the survey, there was 2 surveys. One was a sort of way of having data from the number of students, the number of faculty, blah, blah. So this was a separate survey that could be filled by the person who was managing the data of the school. And there was a second survey that was submitted to leaders at those institutions. And also the interview was made with, how do you call it, the responsible of those institutions. In terms of typology, of course, if typology is also mainly dependent on your angle of interest. Of course, I was influenced by Michael James' typology, who, by the way, I'm greeting. And thanks for being here, Michael. So this is a typology that influenced me, and I wanted to apply it. I realized that no, it does not fit. And this is what led me to suggest the typology I suggested. Now, of course, if I had to take it from, let's say, department or subject-based institution, I will come up with a different typology. But I did not have let's say, this insight to take it from this angle. I don't know if this answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and maybe the data would reveal something differently, right? If we categorize them by all of the Catholic universities together, all of the superior schools together, you know, maybe they would reveal something different than focusing on the foundation. Maybe in this context, the foundation is not as necessary to look at as the analysis, right? I just suggest as a possibility.
I will grant you that if I take your angle, I will come up with a different typology, for sure. I have no doubt. But for this context, like I said, who founded the institutions is determinant in the way even of governance that you will be implementing. So there is a link between the founding entity and the mode of governance. Just take, for instance, the type of conference. This is, and one reason for why this type is having now some trouble is because you don't know really where is the locus of governance, which is different. For instance, if you have one institution that is led by a religious group, they know what it means and they know where they are going. You know where is the locus of governance. It is clear. Same for an institution created just by one diocese, by one bishop. You know where the locus of, let's say, governance and even resources, financial resources, where it is. So yes, I agree that, as you said, I will come with another typology if I take your angle, but still, for this context, the governance and the funding entity is important.
Maybe if I may add to that, of course, the group of institutions, as Jean-Baptiste showed, are very much recently founded. And so they are much more common than what you would look in the global context of Catholic higher education, where there are much more diversity of research universities and more specialized institutions, etc. And for instance, in our research on the internationalization strategy, there we found big differences between how research universities would relate their Catholic identity than other types of institutions. And also if they are much more older, they also have a tendency to be less Catholic in their mission than the younger recently created. So there's more commonality in that sense in the West African context of Catholic institutions.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know if we have two persons who have some responsibility in this area. I don't know if we can have them give a comment on that question, if you allow.
Yeah.
Father Eugene or Brice, do you have something to say about this question?
You have to mute.
Okay.
Okay, here we are in Abidjan. This is in West Africa, in Cote d'Ivoire. Our own institution has known a kind of internal evolving from its creation in 1962, almost as a social center, and expanding according to the challenges toward the end of the 90s, toward 2000s, and where we basically operated from second cycle. It's only 6 years ago that the basic degree has been integrated, and the master's program also has been expanded. I think Brice can make more detailed comments if you want on that, if he's online.
Yeah. No? No, maybe yes. No, I cannot see.
Okay, so basically in terms of identity, simply to put it, we try as much as we can to foster a vision of a Jesuit university. And even very recently, we changed the name of the institution. Was initially an institute for human rights and yeah, right. And then we move on toward SERAP as a Jesuit university, and emphasizing more and more how do you call it, the Jesuit meaning, and we have staff meaning, we have various entities, even with the student right from the beginning. During the week of orientation, there is a full week of orientation for the basic degree students, including at one point with their parents, so that we can impart what we expect, the vision, and where the school is going and the expectation. So it's still a very young institution in terms of number of years, and basically young as most of the university, even public university in West Africa, dated after the 60s. Only the University of Dakar could claim to be the oldest in this area. Most of them came during the end of the 60s, beginning of 70s. So you can see the context, both of the private as well as public universities. They're extremely young, so they are a tremendous challenge. But one thing I would say, which is vital for all of them, perhaps it's good to put that in context. In terms of young people in the age of joining universities and who are actually involved in higher education, they are less than 5 to 6% in the overall in each of those nations. And so you have a huge amount of youngs after the final exam, which they call here baccalaureate, whom the public university cannot integrate, and there is need of quality formation. So I think that when the religious as well as the diocesan step in, it's almost like a necessity to help foster competence inside. Today, whether economy, politics, or social life, quality-based knowledge from the population would be greatly necessary for the future of our nations. So this is what I do see.
Thank you. We go to Yannick. Or you want somebody else to answer it? No?
Father Brisbado, I think, has a comment.
Oh,
yeah.
No, later.
Okay. Then.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Baptiste, for your great presentation. I just have a question. Could you tell us what is the specificity of a Catholic education institution? Because we have so many structures. What is the main particularity of a Catholic one? This is my first question. The other question I have, just coming from the comments made by Eric and the question he asked, is about your methodology. What is the specificity of your methodology? Is it a qualitative one, a quantitative one, or kind of mixed or of both possibilities? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. I think that I will maintain, and I think we all are from this context, and we know it is hard for Catholic institutions. There are many challenges, but still, I think there is a difference. And this difference is not just in terms of success, of the rate of, how do you call it, completion. For sure, in that level, some states do not have the same rate of completion than we have. So but this is not really for me what makes the difference. And this, when I have my conversation with their leaders, the concern is, in addition to this, how do you call it, this completion of this academic, how do you call it, academic accomplishment, what is the human side of it? So if you see all the challenges and some aspects, you will see that student formation come and come again. So I don't know if you see it is the same also here in the US, where, for instance, our school here changed even his name to introduce this aspect of human formations. And in this region, not only there is this concern of human formation that can be typical to the Catholic tradition, but you have also the pressure from the, how do you call it, the outside. You see those terrorists operating and using students who are some of them are have a good training, which means that they just lack maybe this human intelligence that can help them resist to those type of solicitations. So to me, really, this is the challenge. This is a concern, but I think also this is what an added value that Catholic institutions bring on the table. So this human side of the training. Second, regarding your second question, this is, as you said it is a mixed method, but a mixed method that align quantitative, and the quantitative element is the survey, and the qualitative, which was the interview.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, and I'm also conscious that I think we're coming to the time limit. So I want to congratulate you, Jean-Baptiste, on this work. This is really important. If we look at the global context of Catholic higher ed, in the last 25 years, the most significant growth of Catholic colleges and universities have been on the continent of Africa and in Asia. And so to understand what the historical narratives are of these regions and the purposes, expected outcomes, the context of the cultural ethos in relation to or in contradiction with perhaps an ethos of a Catholic institution, and how that frames that institution's structure as well as its measurable criteria for success are really important. So this foundational work in these particular countries is, I think, a critical starting point. And I believe you and others can lead that in ways that haven't been done in the past. As you exhibited from the literature review, very little has been done. So everything and anything that you can gather, I think telling the stories of these institutions, understanding their historical roots, will give some, I think, some insight into the question that that Yannick asked, which is, what are the specific criteria that make these institutions Catholic? Right? And I think each institution has its own narrative, its own story, its own expression of that. But you began at the beginning of your presentation, I think, with a good foundational, not so much the typologies that you were talking about, which are helpful in context of governance structures and decision making, but starting with Ex Corde Ecclesiae and looking at the 4 characteristics of what makes a Catholic university, and then complement that with Pope Francis' most recent encyclical, Veritatis Gaudium, which also expresses a continuum of John Paul II's idea of the Catholic University. So great work, Jean-Baptiste, and I look forward to continuing to be of support to you in any way I can in your future work.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Senator Bryce wanted to make a comment, yeah?
Good. Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. This is a very interesting study. Have two, I don't know, maybe remarks. The first one, this is a personal struggle I'm teaching here in Cote d'Ivoire, the Jesuit University in Abidjan. And I was surprised. Personally, I love to be in the classroom. But for parents, when they visit our institution, they want to meet with a priest in the administration. You know, this is really something that initially I thought that it will be good to have the religious staff maybe in the classroom so that we can have a day-by-day contact with the students. But the reality is that when, at least the perception, when parents come to the institution, they prefer to meet with a religious, a priest, I mean, at the office, you know. In case you would like, I mean, if you were to advise, the hierarchy, where would you suggest to allocate the religious staff? In the classroom or in the administration? And my second question is that, you know, in West Africa, Catholic education has become a brand name, you know, and many Catholic higher education have been created by, not by bishops or religious communities, but by lay people. There are many, many schools across West Africa that bear name of a saints, yes, that are Catholics. I mean, they say that they are Catholics. So, is there any difference between the two types of institution or the three types of institution? I mean, the higher education created by lay people or and those created by bishop or religious communities? This is my two comments. Thank you.
Okay. It is funny because, like I said, the questions was answered by responsible of institution. To them, according to their response, they are very important in administration. So priests are very important in the administration compared to the classroom. And they are indispensable for the, how do you call it, in the spiritual activities. So this is how themselves they perceive their places from the point of view of the responsible. Now, of course, if I have to say my word, my idea will be, they are good everywhere, but I think also in the classroom, because I think a priest with his background, theological, philosophical background, he can, if he is teaching economics, let's say, or politics, there is some nuances that he can bring that a pure economist will not bring to the class. So there is an added value that can lead him to stress one angle rather than the other. Not that he will take, let's say, he will somehow give fake information regarding things that he did not like. No, it is not like or dislike. But what I'm saying that you have this, I presume that you should have this predisposition of knowing that in this angle, I have to stress, for instance, and make my student understand that it is not just, let's say, fiduciary gain that is the most important in our relation, but there is also this human aspect of economics that we should not lose insight. So from my point of view will be really, they will be good also in the classroom if they have the competencies needed to be in classroom. And I think for this, this will be my answer. The second question, I forget it, sorry. I thought that I noted, but I didn't. What was your second question?
Oh, what's about Catholic higher education created by lay people?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. As you said, there are many of them in the region, and they use the label Catholic or saint. But I said also that I can't count them as, I call them allied. I call them allied. But I don't count them really as Catholic institution because like I mentioned it in canon law, you can't use the word Catholic institution if you don't have the recognition of the proper body, which is, it can be the bishop, which can be also Vatican. So since they don't have this formal recognition, it is hard for me to consider them as a Catholic institution. And some of them were founded even by, let's say, ex-religious. So they know what it is. They have this connection. They try to implement some catechism, for instance. They have masses and all those stuff that you can find in Catholic institution, you'll find them there. But themselves, they know that they can't call themselves Catholic. And some of them are considering doing this formal recognition. They just said that they need some time because they are young and they need to have experience before moving forward to ask this recognition.
Yeah, we have to be conscious about time. So Norbert, you can have the last question and then answer, and then we have to come to some concluding.
Yeah, it's just like such a short suggestion, actually. As I was listening to Jean-Baptiste, I was wondering what a comparison with Anglophone peer institutions in West Africa could bring to the conversation we are having here. So that's something you might want considering, looking at one or the other institutions, say in Ghana or Nigeria, and what differences you might find there, what that might tell you about the institutions you are researching on in Francophone West Africa. Thank you.
I'm thinking of it and I'm looking funding. So if you have some funding, we will. Thanks. Thanks for the idea. Yes, definitely that will be a good contribution to the conversation on Catholic higher education, expanded to the whole West Africa. And I'm really thinking of it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and it's part of a potential long list of very relevant kind of research topics that have to be done, and hopefully in the future will be done, about Catholic universities in Africa. Also the comparison to other religious universities which are also emerging, like the more evangelistic universities, the Islamic universities, and how Catholic universities are different or similar in their approach to their religious identity than the other ones. So, but unfortunately, Jean-Baptiste has only a limited time to do all that research, but maybe in a long history he will be doing that, and others will hopefully follow. Jean-Baptiste is going to finalize his paper based on his research, and we hope to publish it as the Center for International Higher Education as a perspectives publication in the summer, and we will make it online for free available as all our publications to you digitally, and we hope also as a center to continue our work on Catholic higher education in Africa and other parts of the world, because we think it's an important dimension of our center. But as Jean-Baptiste has said, funding is one of the challenges we have, but we hope that also in cooperation with other Catholic universities and with IFCU and other associations, that we might be able to attract some funding from foundations like Porticus to make that work happen in the future. I thank you all for your participation in this webinar. One of the interesting things about these challenging times is that when we organize webinars, when we organize this kind of seminars, lectures, we do it on site in Boston College, and in general we have then a participation of something like 10 or 15 people, and here we had over 20 people participating and from different parts of the world. So it learns us how we have to modernize our seminar series, and I'm in particular thankful to Tessa Lakil and Joe Wang for helping us to organize this webinar series. And we have another webinar on Chinese higher education coming on in the first week of May by Dr. Wen Wen. So you're also invited to attend that webinar. And thank you all for your participation in this webinar, and thank you, Jean-Baptiste, in particular, for doing this presentation and answering all our questions. And for sure, the discussion will not stop here, but will go on about the future of African and West African, in particular, higher education. Thank you all, and have a good further day.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.